Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I am so happy that you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murders of 2-year-old Elise Donnison and her big brother, 3-year-old Harry. So picture this, it's a cold January morning and we are in the small town of Heathfield in East Sussex. And there's this pale woman and she's walking into a small local police station and she's murmuring to herself that she wants to turn herself in. Now her voice very quiet, barely above a whisper, so you can't make out much of what she is saying, but one phrase really cuts through, and it's a phrase that horrified because she said, quote, "I have killed my children." Okay, now this woman was Fiona Donnison, and the lead up that led to these murders is, I don't want to say as shocking as the murders itself, but it's definitely incredibly upsetting, and it's a woman unraveling, okay? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Factor. Factor is a meal delivery service that delivers fresh, never frozen, chef-crafted, ready-to-eat meals that are ready to eat in just 2 minutes, which for somebody with a busy schedule like me, that is a lifesaver. I have a very busy schedule. Okay, I have a full-time job. I am a full-time mom, which in itself is a full-time job, and that is a lot to take on. And that's not even adding on the fact that I'm also trying to live a healthy lifestyle, to get in all of my steps, get my heart pumping blood throughout my body, and it just feels like there are not enough hours in the day. And then you add that to the fact that I have to plan every single meal every single day, and that can be incredibly exhausting. But Factor helps set me up for success by saving the time and energy I usually put into things like going to the grocery store, the prep work of cooking, and the cleanup. And that leaves me more time to do things that are incredibly invaluable to me, right? Like taking care of my family and my health, both mental, by getting a few minutes at the end of the day to kind of unwind and relax, and physical, making sure to get my heart pumping and moving and go to the gym or get my steps in. And listen, I do all this work, but then I have been known to make food choices that don't align with my goals out of exhaustion and convenience. But here's the thing. Factor is arguably, or inarguably, really more convenient because 1, it's in my fridge. 2, it's delicious. And 3, it actually aligns with my goals. And 4, just to add it on, tack it on at the end, it's actually less expensive than takeout. And speaking of delicious, since we were just talking about that, Factor recently added more to their global cuisines, which is something I've always really liked about Factor because variety is the spice of life. And now they have even more options for their Asian and Mediterranean cuisines if that's something that you're into. And that's something that I am definitely into. And they have all of that on top of the fact that they have a huge weekly menu to choose from in general. They recently doubled the size of their menu to over 80 rotating weekly meals, and they are very inclusive in their offerings from things like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or my personal go-to, the vegan and veggie options. Then they also have snacks, they have juices, they have smoothies, and they even have breakfast, which is something that my husband has been very into, the overnight oats. I cannot stop him from eating all of my overnight oats. I love Factor, and I think you will too. So if all this sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to head to factor75.com or click the link in my description box and use the code BRATTERSTEINFB50 to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code BRATTERSTEINFB50 to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year today. Now I just want to say a big thank you to Factor for sponsoring today's video. It's partners like Factor that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock, don't ever change. So now with all of that said, today I'm going to tell you the story of the murders of Elise and Harry. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer once you have something to go on, okay? And the question of the day is this. Do you believe that Fiona Donnison was struggling from a mental health issue that would make her, not responsible legally for the murders of her children? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below because I am curious to hear what you have to say. Now, with all that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murders of Harry Donnison and his little sister Elise at the hands of their own mother. So to get started, I want to talk about the family and the dynamics there because everything that led up to the murders of these children started in the home. And specifically right now, we're going to be in East Sussex, which is in the UK, right? Specifically at Southeast England. And that is the backdrop for the horrific murders of these two beautiful kids. So Elise and Harry, they were born to their parents. This was their mother, Fiona, and their father, Paul. Paul and Fiona met in 1999 at work. They both worked for the same insurance company in the city of London. And when they met, they realized they had a lot in common. Like they were both in their 40s. They both had 2 children. And at the time that they met, they were both actually married to other people. Now, even though they were married, they were clearly into each other. Like, I don't know much about Paul, but Fiona was said to have been a catch. Like, her father was a policeman in Scotland. She had been a nanny, for 5 years in, like, Spain before coming back and getting a good job as a credit manager. And this is at the place where she worked, where she met Paul. And reportedly, there was no overlap. There was no cheating. Their relationship started as a platonic friendship. But sources that knew Fiona said that once Fiona met Paul, her relationship with her first husband, this was a guy named Derek, sort of fell apart. And it quickly got really messy. There was a messy divorce and a messy custody battle. It was just like, not the best situation. But eventually, Fiona and her first husband, Derek, did separate, and then Paul and his wife did separate, though there does seem like there may have been a little overlap between Fiona and Paul's wife, because though Paul and his first wife were separated, they were still living together for a while. It's a little bit messy and it's a little bit vague, but sources say he was still living in the house. Some stuff definitely happened with Fiona that ended up causing him to move out of the house eventually, but they didn't officially get in a relationship with each other, Paul and Fiona, till 3 years after they met. So, as I said, in the beginning of the relationship, Paul, he's still living with his wife, and yet somehow Fiona gets pregnant. And that's why I'm like, was there no affair? Was there no overlap? Because how did that happen? Immaculate conception? I think not. I do not believe that Fiona is like a Mother Mary situation. Anyways, she gets pregnant, right? And though she was pregnant, reports say that Paul still stayed living with his wife. Even after his and Fiona's first child, this was a daughter named Mia, was born, he was still living with his wife. But it did seem like perhaps he was bouncing back and forth between the two women because, I mean, obviously, if he's living with his wife and getting somebody else pregnant, there's a little back and forth there. But it took something pretty drastic to get him to finally, like, commit to being just with Fiona. And unfortunately, what it took for that to happen was the unexpected death of their first daughter, because she died when she was just 9 months old, which is an unimaginable nightmare. So apparently what had happened here was it was one of the nights that Paul was with his ex-wife. It was in April of 2004, and it was his ex-wife's birthday, I believe. So he was in Surrey. Surrey. UK friends. I think I said that right. But so he's in Surrey, and Fiona is home alone with Mia. Okay. And she decides she's going to go to bed, right? The baby's already in bed. She's going to go to bed. So she goes in to check on her baby one more time before going to sleep. And this is where she finds her unresponsive. And so she panics. She calls 999, which I believe is the emergency number there. Correct me if I'm wrong. And she tells the operator, quote, "She's not moving at all. Her eyes are completely shut. Oh no, what have I done? I can't." She was screaming. She was crying. And she added, quote, "She's not breathing. She's cold. And she's not breathing." Now, the operator did try to keep Fiona calm and gave her instructions on performing life-saving measures on her tiny baby. She told her, to take her out of the crib and to put her on the floor and to perform CPR. But unfortunately, it was not enough, and little Mia lost her life. Now, this was horrifying. This would be horrifying for anybody to experience, as I'm sure you can imagine. And it was after this happened that Paul officially moved in with Fiona, because he wanted to be there with her while they both went through this absolutely hellish thing that was their reality now, right? And really, the situation is that only the two of them really would know what the other was going through. So they needed to lean on each other. So they were together, they were a couple, and though things had never really been great, like they were never like a good and happy couple, they did seem to sort of love each other, right? Like, I don't know, I wasn't in the relationship, but I imagine if you stick it out, you must love them to some degree. And with time, they even got to a place where they felt like they could rebuild their family together after such a horrifying loss. Which I don't know how people do it. I really don't know, because if you've been here a while, like, this is not a good comparison to a baby, right? But if you've been here a while, you would know that I had a dog, and He was always in the back of my videos, and it's been a couple of years since he died, and I can't even imagine still to this day having another dog. So I can't even imagine if you lost your kid, the idea of having another kid, like it breaks my heart to even think about. But they did. They got to a point where they wanted to have a family again. And this was surprising, especially when it came to Fiona, because when Fiona lost Mia, when they lost Mia, she was said to have, she kind of lost it, right? Like any reasonable mother would. Like I can't even imagine how you wouldn't. And people who knew her said that prior to Mia's death, Fiona had been confident, strong, and devoted to her family. But after Mia died, she was devastated, and people around her didn't know if she'd ever recover from that. But despite that, in 2006, Fiona gave birth to Harry, and then 2 years later, in 2008, she gave birth to Elise. And by all accounts across the board, both Fiona and Paul were said to have loved their kids. They were so excited when Harry and Elise were born, and they were often said to talk about how lucky they were to get the babies that they had. Harry and Elise were described as lovely, well-behaved, affectionate kids. Harry was said to be just a typical little boy, a little gentleman who could also be a little bit of a handful, and a little boy who they called a pickle, which is just a super cute nickname. And Elise was said to just be very sweet and very beautiful. Like they were both very beautiful kids. Fiona presented herself as a loving mother. She had actually joined a Facebook group called just like I Love My Kids months before the murders, and she would post photos of her kids and talk about them. And like the last post she made shortly before she took her kid's life, she posted some photos she had taken of Elise the July before, where she wrote, quote, "My beautiful daughter, I know I'm biased." And that's coming from a woman who would go on to kill both of her kids, okay? So let's now talk about the darkness that happened behind closed doors, because clearly it was there, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be here now. And this is one of those situations where, though from the outside everything looked like it was perfect, from the inside it clearly wasn't. So inside the home, it was Fiona and Paul, it was Elise and Harry, and it was Fiona's 2 older sons from her previous marriage. And according to Paul, inside the home, it was a tense, chaotic situation because Fiona was the type of person who suffered from mood swings, okay? You didn't know what person you were going to get, what version of Fiona you were going to get day to day or even minute to minute. He said on one hand, she could be a good mother, very nice, very pleasant, a great hostess, a great cook, which I was like, okay. That's not really a personality trait, but it is a skill. And then she could flip on a dime and she could be very confrontational and incredibly antagonistic. Like, okay, Paul said that when they first started dating, they would make plans to see each other. And if he was even just a couple of minutes late, she would lock him out of the house and refuse to let him in. He said from the very beginning of their relationship, Fiona was very manipulative and controlling and jealous, but this was just something that he put up with. And Paul said specifically of this, and I quote, "She basically wanted the best of everything at all times. And almost from the start, the house wasn't good enough. My income wasn't good enough. The holidays we had weren't good enough." It just seemed like the version of Fiona you were going to get depended on, 1, how she woke up that morning, what kind of mood she was in, and 2, the type of stress that the couple was under. And apparently the couple was under a lot of stress all the time for a variety of different reasons. The couple fought a lot about the kids. Specifically, they would fight about Fiona's 2 older sons, but they didn't really ever explain like what they would fight about when it came to the older sons, but there was tension there. There was also tension about money, which seems to be like the number one thing for most people is that they fight and get tense about money. And I guess with Fiona, she was particularly weird about it. And she would like try to make Paul feel bad because she made more than him. And she would even refer to herself as the MBW, or the main breadwinner. Which is ironic because on one hand, yes, she made good money. She had a good city job and she had good paychecks coming in, but she was also like a mega spender and ended up in hella debt. Apparently, she ended up being like 50,000 pounds in debt, which in US dollars, that's $70,000, which immediately gives me like a little tummy ache because my credit card gets to 1,000 and I start sweating. But despite this behavior that would definitely make one think that Fiona thought she was better than Paul, she also seemed to really want him, or rather wanted him to want her. Because get this, I didn't even mention this yet, but okay. The 2 were never married. They were together. They had 2 kids, 3 kids. One passed away, but they were never married, right? But you may notice, or I don't even know if I told you this, they have the same name, Paul Donnison and Fiona Donnison. Now, how did this happen? Well, Fiona went and had her name legally changed by deed poll, whatever that is. I don't think we have that in the US. And she did this without even telling him. Can you even imagine this woman who you have not even proposed to just comes home with your last name without even telling you about it? Yikes-a-bee. So all that's to say, they were together and things were not great, but then they were going to get even worse because, okay, remember Fiona has this high paying job, something she's very proud of, something that gives her a lot of satisfaction. And what is the word that people get from a job that they like? She finds a lot of self-worth in her job. Okay, well, she loses her job. Or as they say over the pond, she was made redundant, which that term, made redundant, sounds like such a sick burn. Anyways, this happened in July of 2009, and this was said to be a huge blow to Fiona, her ego and her self-esteem and her self-worth. Like, this sucked for her. And then at the same time that this happened, Fiona started to get the feeling that Paul was being unfaithful. Now, whether or not he was flirting at all at this time is unclear. Maybe he was. Maybe she was just feeling this because she's going through something, so she's now going through everything. It's unclear. What we can say is this just fanned the flame of the fire that was burning inside Fiona. Now, despite these problems, the family did still stay together, and they even seemed like they were making steps towards trying to become even closer and have that closeness as a family. Like, shortly before the events that really led up to the murders in this case, they went away together on vacation, or holiday, as the UK friends call it, and they went to Ireland, and it was the whole family. It was Fiona and Paul and the kids and the other kids, and they were said to have had a great time, or so Paul thought, because on September 1st, 2009, they had gotten back from their holiday. Paul goes to work. He comes home from work and finds that Fiona has just moved out. She moved out, she took some stuff, she took the kids, and she just left him a note that said in part, quote, "For the sake of the children, I feel I have no choice but to move out. I'm sorry, Fiona." Now, Paul was said to be shocked. He had no idea this was going to happen. And can you imagine being so blindsided by that, coming home and finding that your kids are just gone and you don't know where they are? It's insane. And Paul said of his reaction to this, quote, "I can't express how I felt when I walked in the house. I just ran around the house completely disbelieving what I was seeing. Your children have gone, you don't know where they are, and you don't know the reason why they are gone." And man, having this guy's kids taken away from him was his literal nightmare, the worst case scenario, or so he thought, because Fiona had this magic ability to take somebody's worst case scenario and somehow make it even worse. Because in the months between September, when she left him, and January, when she killed the kids, she did everything in her power to make this man's life a living hell. So at first, she wouldn't even tell him where the kids were. Okay, so this was a nightmare. He couldn't see them at all because he didn't know where they were. Then he finds out where they are, right? And he finds out that they are in Lightwater, which is in Surrey. Lightwater, Surrey. Okay. And this house that she moved into, so she's renting a house, it's 100 yards away from Paul's ex-wife's house. Ex-wife's house. Okay. And this in itself is strange because Fiona knew that Paul's ex-wife lived here, and Fiona herself had no tie to this area. So when Paul finds out that she's living next door to his wife or his ex-wife, and then his ex-wife finds out that as well, they're both incredibly uncomfortable with the situation. They felt like it was a choice to be manipulative on Fiona's part, because why else would she move there? But that aside, she moves, doesn't tell him where the kids are, finally tells him where the kids are, but then will only let him see them on her terms. Okay, he would have to plan it with her, and then they would make plans. And when he would come over, she would just not be there, or she would cancel the plans last minute and not tell him. Or in one instance, she actually let him to come over and see the kids on New Year's, and they had been together, and then he left for a short while. Not sure why, but he did. And when he came back, she wouldn't let him back in to see the kids. She was just making his life a nightmare. He said that Fiona knew these kids were his life, and she was using them to keep him under her thumb. He said that she was using the kids like chess pieces to ensure that he would comply to everything she wanted. He said that if he did what she wanted when she wanted, it was fine and he could see the kids. But anytime he had any sort of pushback, that was it. He couldn't see the kids. And she would do this because this was the main way she could hurt him. Now, what's wild here is despite this manipulative, controlling, and vindictive behavior, Paul and Fiona did try to work it out. okay? Like when Fiona first left, Paul was said to have actually like wanted her back. He would call her and like beg for her to come back to him, though with time. The idea of being with Fiona did become less and less appealing to him. But eventually what it got to is that Fiona was the lifeline to the kids, right? So whether or not he wanted to be with her, that was aside. What he wanted was to be with those kids. So if he had to sacrifice his happiness and be with somebody who made him unhappy and made his life crazy in order to be with his children, that was worth it for him. Because if they were together, at least he'd be able to see them and she couldn't move them around all the time like the chess pieces she was using them for. But he said, like, even though he was doing this, it was incredibly hard for him because, one, he knew all the stuff that she had done to him, so he knew what he was dealing with. But the other thing was he never really knew which Fiona he was going to be dealing with. So they're together, but there is a problem, okay? And it's that during the time that they were separated, Paul had struck up a friendship, okay? A friendship with a woman named Allison. Okay, Allison, he apparently had gone to school together, and they were reunited at this, like, Friends United school reunion type situation. And he said that the two were just platonic. They were just friends. Though he did admit that the emails they would send to each other were a little bit flirty, okay? But he said that he never started an actual relationship with Allison until he was sure him and Fiona were done, which comes a little bit later. But here's the thing. He says that, but at the same time, on September 26th, 2009, him and Fiona were working on getting back together, and they were staying in a hotel together. And during his time staying in this hotel with Fiona, where he's working on getting back together with her, he is sending emails and texts to Allison. And he said later in court, right, because he gets put on the stand, he said that these texts could have been interpreted as flirty, and said that Fiona did see these texts. Now, despite him doing this and despite her seeing these, they did still try to work it out, but it wasn't going well because he's telling her, Paul's telling Fiona, that this is a platonic friendship, and Fiona's like, I don't buy that at all. I think that is a lie. Like, I saw the messages. So she would bring it up a lot. She would often try to contact Allison to try to get her to stay away from him, and she was still trying to control and manipulate Paul at every turn. So finally, he got to the point that he was just done. With that, on January 15th, 2010, after the holidays, Paul and Fiona decided to call things quits for good between the two of them, okay? And then between that date, the 15th and the 26th, when the kids were killed, all the dominoes just started to topple over. First, almost immediately upon ending the relationship with Fiona, Paul and Allison decided to make their relationship official. They weren't friends, it wasn't platonic, they were seeing each other. Next, 3 days after the relationship between Paul and Fiona officially ended, Fiona called the cops to tell them that Paul had assaulted her. At the time that the police showed up, she had a small cut on her thumb, and she told them that she had red marks on her arms, but by the time the cops got there, they were done. They were done, they were gone, they were no longer there. But she told the cops that Paul had threatened her, said he was going to take her life, and she said that he said, specifically, and I quote, "If I cannot have my children, I have nothing to live for. So I'm going to kill you now. We can go together." And the irony of that is not lost on me. Now, Paul, of course, denied all of this, but despite that, he was arrested and he was released on bail with the instruction that he could not contact Fiona at all, which in turn made it difficult for him to see his kids. She even went to the nursery school where both Elise and Harry went, and they had been going there a while, and she went there and told them that Paul was no longer even able to pick up his kids. Which wasn't true, by the way. Legally, he still could, but she told them that he couldn't. She also made a point in these days to call Allison and to threaten her, and this was super concerning for Allison because Allison knew that Fiona knew where she lived because Fiona had showed up at her house several times telling her to stay away from Paul. But she didn't, right? Allison didn't stay away from Paul, and neither did Fiona, because Fiona made it a point to keep going over to the Meadowside home that she and Paul had shared together, because in the basis of needs, that's where she really wanted to be, is what I'm trying to say. She wanted to be in that home, so she kept showing up. But the thing is, she was doing it without permission, because she had moved out. She didn't live there anymore. It got so bad that on January 24th, just 2 days before the events that brought us here today, Fiona, goes to the Meadowside house. She goes inside and she barricades I can't talk today. She barricades herself inside his house and will not leave. She will not leave. So Paul, he has to call the cops, okay? And when he calls the cops and the cops get there, Fiona refuses to leave. They try to get her to leave and she gets very uncooperative. So Paul gets to a point where he's like, you know what? I will leave. I will go stay with a friend. I bet the friend's Allison. I'm going to go. and she can stay, and you guys can figure this out, but I'm going to dip. And so Paul said goodnight. He said goodbye to Elise and Harry, all while Fiona stood there and gave him looks of complete hatred. And then he left, and that would be the last time he would ever see his kids alive. 2 days later, on January 26th, the day that the kids were killed, Fiona made an appeal for an occupancy order for the home that she and Paul had shared in Meadowside. Even though she had literally chosen to move out and get a new place, she wanted to legally force Paul to move out, but was told that the order couldn't happen immediately. These things took time. So in response, she went back to the house where Paul lived and she tried to break in, but she found that Paul had changed all of the locks. So she took a brick and smashed in his window. And in response, Paul left that night to go stay with Allison. And then the next morning, Fiona would walk into that police station and tell the people there that she had killed both of her kids. So let's now get into that. At about 10:45 a.m. on Wednesday, January 27th, 2010, Fiona Donnison entered the Heathfield police station in East Sussex. As soon as she entered, the woman at the front desk, who I believe was actually also named Fiona, noticed that this Fiona seemed not with it. Okay, she seemed intoxicated, she was kind of falling all over herself, and she was talking so quietly that you could barely hear her. At one point, she literally fell into a newspaper stand. She was trying to hold herself up and she was mumbling. And finally, she got out a sentence and she said, quote, "I have killed my children." She said this with no emotion. She was very monotone. And it was at this moment that the woman she was talking to looked down and noticed that Fiona had blood on her hands. Now, Fiona would not tell police where her kids' bodies were. Okay, she couldn't even bring herself to say her kids' names, but she was able to give them a general area of where they could be found. So quickly, police rushed over to that area and they started searching. And within an hour, they found Fiona's car, and it was parked just around the block from the home she had shared with Paul. Once they found Fiona's silver Nissan, they busted open one of her windows in order to gain access to the car. And once inside, they popped the trunk, and that's where they found the two kids. Both Elise and Harry's bodies had been placed in separate holdalls, which are like large duffel bags. She had zipped them up and put them into the trunk of her car and then drove to her ex's house, stopping along the way to buy painkillers and a bottle of water. Paramedics at the scene, who were there when the duffel bags were unzipped to confirm that the kids were inside, were so traumatized by what they saw that a few of them had to go home. When given their post-mortem examination, it was found that the kids had been dead for less than a day when they were found in that trunk, and that it appeared they had been smothered to death with their own bedding because they were both still dressed in their pajamas. So after finding the bodies in the trunk, police searched Fiona's home, removing brown bags filled with evidence, and of course police were able to charge Fiona with murder, and she would be taken into custody after being discharged from the hospital, because I didn't mention this yet, but when she went into that police station, I said that the lady saw blood on Fiona's palms, but I mentioned that the kids were smothered. Well, apparently she had self-inflicted wounds on her wrists and upper arms, and she also had a toxic level of a drug that I'm going to try to pronounce called diphenhydramine. This was in her system, and it's the key ingredient in Nitol, which is a sleep aid. And so she's in the hospital, and you know what's so fucked up is that reportedly while in the hospital, one of the people who worked there heard Fiona talking to herself. And this will chill you, but they heard this woman Fiona saying to herself, and I quote, "Harry, where are you? There you are. Peekaboo, I'm going to kill you." Which, if that is any insight into what these children's final moments was like, that is horrifying. And can you even imagine knowing this as Paul, as the father of these kids? Because I truly cannot. After all of this came out, a couple of Paul's family members came out and made statements on his behalf. And one of them was his brother, who talked about Paul's mental state. And he said of it, quote, "Paul will never get over this. He is absolutely devastated. Those children were his life, and now he will never see them grow. Everything has been taken away from him." Paul's mother also came forward saying that their entire family was distraught and Paul was just a mess. And in a statement that was issued by the Sussex police, Paul said of his children, Paul wasn't even able to say this. This was something he said and then the police said for him. And he said of his children, and I quote, "Harry and Elise were the lights that shone the brightest in my life, and I am unable to begin to comprehend why this has happened to them. I love them with all my heart, and they in turn gave me the unconditional love that only a child can give a parent. Every day that I saw them was precious and wonderful, but I had no idea just how precious. They were only babies, and I was looking forward to watching them grow up and their mom help them to live their lives. This poor man to go through months of not knowing where his kids were and then worrying about his kids and then going to the cops and telling the cops that he was worried about his kids because reportedly he did. Reportedly, he had contacted the police about Fiona's behavior. Like a close family friend who preferred not to be named said that Paul had been calling the police, had been telling them that he was worried about Fiona. He was worried about his kids' welfare and didn't know like what she was capable of. But even he said he didn't think she was capable of this. Now, police have acknowledged that, yes, they spoke to the family, but they were pretty vague about it. They didn't say if they spoke to the family because Paul had called wanting them to check on the kids because of Fiona. They just acknowledged that, like, there had been contact with the family, but they also did make a statement that there was going to be a review put in place and they were going to be looking at how they handled, calls about domestic disputes. And the reason they were doing this is because they did determine that social services had been called out to look at the kids, but they hadn't removed them from the home, which sounds to me like police are admitting that Paul called about his kids, but they're not saying that outright. Who knows? We don't know. But what we do know is that both of these kids were murdered by their mother, and that most people, everybody who didn't live in that home basically, was shocked to hear it. Like, okay, neighbors who lived near Fiona in her new rented home said that she had been acting strange in the time leading up to the murders. They said that for a week prior to the murders, they hadn't seen her, like she hadn't been home. They had seen her pile all the kids into the car and then just leave. And shortly after that, a to let sign, or to rent, I guess it's the same thing, was put in the window. So they just figured that she was gone for good. But then she came back that Saturday and she was cleaning the house from top to bottom, and they just figured that she was cleaning the house because she was planning to move. Nobody would have ever guessed there was anything evil building up inside of her. People who knew Fiona just couldn't believe she would do this. Like the family's former nanny said that Fiona doted on her kids. This nanny, her name was Lynn, she said that she had seen Fiona in the days leading up to the murders and she just seemed totally normal. She seemed positive. She was talking about the potential of moving back into the family home because remember, she was like petitioning for occupancy and she just seemed like nothing was wrong. She just seemed like herself. Even this nanny's son, he had seen Fiona in the days leading up to the murders and he had even played with the kids. And he said that everything seemed fine, that Fiona maybe seemed a little quiet, but nothing seemed wrong. Lynn said that Fiona loved her kids and was devastated when she lost Mia to cot death, which is, I believe, the same as SIDS. She said that like something inside of Fiona must have really snapped for her to do something like this to her children, because she and like basically everybody thought that she just loved her kids. Like when she found out that she was pregnant with Harry and Elise, she was so excited. I mean, shortly before the murders, I guess Fiona had gotten a new job and she had started working from home, and she wrote like an emotional email to a friend where she said that she was so happy that she now had the opportunity to spend more time with her kids. She said that she got like 3 full days to be with her kids. And if you know, that's incredibly valuable. Fiona's ex-husband's dad, his name was Dennis, right? And he said that he always saw Fiona as a good mother. He said that he found her to be like a nice person, so he couldn't believe this had happened. And he said that like something must have triggered her. He couldn't imagine a situation where that didn't happen because again, he saw her in such a positive light. Though he did acknowledge he hadn't seen her in 10 years at this point when this case happened, and that he had only ever seen her with his grandkids, not with Elise and Harry. And then that just makes me think about her kids from her first marriage, because like she killed their siblings. You know what I mean? They were a little bit older. One was like 15 or 16. The other was between 10 and 12, 10, 11, 12, something like that. So for them to learn she did this and then learn she was going to take her own life and like leave you guys, and then to find out after the fact that she left you guys a suicide note, because I didn't mention this yet. But when police like searched her house and searched the scene and everything, they found a suicide note. There were 2 of them, I believe, but one was in her purse for her boys, where she said to them in part, quote, "By the time you have received this, I will have gone to be with Harry, Elise, and Mia. I am sorry I won't be there to see you grow up. I loved you all more than life itself. Please remember the good times we all had. I will watch over you in heaven. I am so sorry Paul made your lives so miserable. He was a bad choice for all of you. I will always love you forever." And you may be wondering like what she meant when she said that Paul was bad for all of them and that she was sorry about Paul. And that's something that we will get into when we start talking about her defense, what she says happened, and like what led up to the murders, and what she said in the aftermath of her trial. Which, let's get into that. Let's get into the legal of it all. So, of course, Fiona was arrested and she was charged with the 2 counts of murder against her children. And she denied the 2 counts of murder, which I believe is just the same as like pleading not guilty in the US. Surprisingly, despite what we know about this case, Fiona did have her fair share of supporters. There were like half a dozen people there at her initial trial, or no, her initial hearing, that were there in support of her. And 2 of them even like yelled out to her as she was led out of the courtroom that they loved her. The defense tried to say that Fiona was not in her right mind when she committed the murder against her 2 children. They said that she was, suffering from major depression and that the murders were part of a failed murder and suicide attempt. They added that by definition, a woman who has otherwise been a good mother who would go on to do something like this had to have been legally insane because it is such a departure from who she was as a person. And so they were wanting her charges to get downgraded to manslaughter. But the prosecution, as I'm sure you can imagine, had a very different point of view. The prosecution believed that Fiona used her children as the ultimate pawns and intentionally murdered them to, quote, wreak havoc. To, quote, wreak revenge on Paul in the most extreme way possible after having spent the preceding weeks, quote, maximizing disruption to his life. They also believed that her plan, instead of a murder-suicide, was actually to kill the kids, then go to Paul and tell him what happened so that she could break his heart, before then killing him too, or trying to frame him for the kids' murders. Now, the reason they believe that this was the case is because they found evidence and science that showed that after killing the kids, Fiona had turned the navigation off in her car and had turned off her phone before driving over to Paul's house. She then went to go inside, couldn't get in, broke a window, climbed in, and waited for him with 2, quote, what's the quote? They were big, long, sharp kitchen knives, and then just waited for him to come home. But he never did come home because he stayed at his girlfriend Allison's all night. And that whole thing makes me wonder, because they say that she was going to plan to either kill him or frame him. And when I think about it, I'm like, how could she really frame him? Like, what do you think her plan was? Because to me, it sounds like if she broke into his house with 2 large knives, she was probably going, allegedly, to kill him too. The framing thing doesn't make as much sense in my mind, but I might just not be putting that puzzle together properly. But you'll have to let me know what you think. Anyways, this is what they were saying. This is what each of the opposite sides were saying was the case. And they both had, doctors, like mental health professionals, who gave Fiona exams, looked into her to try to either prove their theory or disprove the other side's theory. So when the prosecution's doctor took the stand, they basically said that they did not believe that Fiona had a mental illness that would make it such she was not legally responsible for what she did to her children. They had seen her a bunch of times. They had given her several tests. They had even given her one evaluation that was considered to be like the most accurate test one can give in order to detect malingering, right? If you don't know what malingering is, it's basically just like lying, like pretending to be crazy when you're not, right? And when she took this test, when they evaluated her in this way, they found that Fiona was 100% likely to be feigning psychological problems or symptoms. They said because the test indicated deception, you really couldn't believe anything that she said. And they said that there were stark and very obvious differences between what she said was going on within her and how she was actually presenting herself in the day-to-day life. Like, for example, Fiona claimed to suffer from, quote, depression, difficulty in sleeping, poor appetite, poor concentration, motivation, and long-standing memory deficiency. She also said that this became worse after the murders, but that didn't seem to be true because she was getting enough sleep at night. She was getting 8 hours of sleep. She was taking naps. She wasn't skipping meals, and she was even sometimes asking for more meals, like fruit, between meals. They also said she didn't have difficulty moving around the hospital by herself, knowing where things were, which suggested she did not have a poor memory. And she even took part in activities like art and photography and gym, card making, and even often used the computer at the hospital. And the prosecution's expert said, listen, it's not uncommon for a defendant to start malingering right before they go to trial because they're realizing just how much trouble they're in, and they're realizing that their goose is effectively cooked. The defense's expert disagreed, obviously. They said that she was clearly distraught and was trying to comprehend how this had happened, like desperately trying to understand how she did what she did. And they said that she never denied any involvement. They said that like she took an unusual, like she put an unusual amount of involvement or responsibility rather on herself by not even trying to claim that the alcohol was to blame or the drugs were to blame. She just was like, it was me, but how did I do this? They also said that they tested her for psychopathic tendencies and that when they gave her this test, this evaluation, she came up with the lowest possible score. And the reason this is relevant is that according to them, is people with, quote, people with psychopathic tendencies are very likely to malinger. And they added that typically people who malinger will just claim they don't remember anything about the crime they were charged with, but that wasn't the case with Fiona. She wasn't claiming she didn't remember. She was just claiming she didn't understand why she did it. They also added that they believed that this was a sincere suicide attempt, that she wasn't just going to kill her kids and frame her ex. She was trying to take her own life. And to strengthen this, they brought up an instance since after being arrested where she tried to take her own life as well. Because I guess, in prison awaiting trial, while her attorneys are working on her trial, she swallowed a razor. Like she swallowed the razor part of a pencil sharpener. To which I'm like, swallowing a razor does sound a little crazy to me. And Fiona said that she did it because she was hearing like a woman's voice like tell her to do it. But she also said she did it because she couldn't stand the idea of coping with trial. But basically the defense just said there was no signs that she was calculating or manipulative, and that Fiona only ever said how much she loved her babies or her younger children, which is how she referred to them, because she couldn't even bring herself to say their names because she was too upset. And speaking of upset, Paul had to take the stand during Fiona's trial, and he really went through it. He was scrutinized really hard with them asking questions about like how he was with Fiona, about his new girlfriend, about whether or not there was an affair, about whether or not he was a violent person to Fiona or to the kids, because Fiona went ahead and said that he was, like, remember she called the cops on him and she said that he was a violent man who had a tendency to like punch walls and smash bottles. They asked him how he was with Fiona's boys because of what she had said in her suicide note, and asked him if he was too aggressive sometimes with Harry, because these are all things that Fiona said. And this was super upsetting for Paul because he felt like he was the one on trial, and he felt like Fiona, the murderer, was treated with kids' gloves. And the prosecution agreed. They were like, listen, what does any of this have to do with her killing the kids? Like, even if all of it was true, it has nothing to do with why Fiona murdered her children. And of course, Fiona couldn't give a reason for murdering her children because, strangely, by trial, she was saying she didn't remember any of the events of the murder, which actually contradicts what the defense's doctor was saying, which was that somebody who was malingering would pretend that they didn't remember anything that happened. And now here she was saying she didn't remember anything that happened. The prosecution said that Fiona was not simply mad. She was instead a narcissist who had an overdeveloped sense of importance and self-entitlement. And no, that's not right. Self-importance and entitlement. And they said that her choosing not to testify at her hearing at all was evidence of that, because she never said anything. And then she even tried, and this is crazy, she even tried to not be present when the verdict was going to be read because it would be too difficult for her. But the judge was like, no, you will be there, and made her come. Anyways, the prosecution said that for Fiona, rejection was the ultimate insult. So in retaliation, she punished Paul in the most extreme way she knew how. And this poor man, like, okay, I say poor man, I don't know anything about him. Every single thing Fiona said about him could be true. And what I will say is that he still didn't deserve for his kids to be killed. You know what I mean? And he had to take the stand. He had to take the stand, and he told the court about the last time he saw his kids alive, which was very, very difficult. And he said of this, quote, Harry was in his pajamas and he came over and wrapped his little arms around me and we hugged and I gave him the toy. And it was a police car for anybody who's wondering. But he continued saying, quote, and I was kneeling down. He had his arms around my shoulders and my neck and I was cuddling him. And Fiona was standing 2 or 3 feet away with a look of absolute hatred and evil on her face. Harry was then shooed back into his bedroom. That was the last time I saw him alive. I then went to Elise's bedroom and she was peacefully asleep. I gave her a peck on the cheek and she wiggled her nose. She didn't wake. And that was the last time I saw Elise. And the whole time he said all of this, he refused to look at Fiona. In closing, the prosecution said they understood this was a complicated, complex case and said that instinctually we as human beings, when we find out a mother has killed their kids, want to try to believe that something was wrong, that something had to have been mentally wrong with her for her to do something like this, because it's a mother's job to just love their kids. But then they added that there was nothing loving about when Fiona shoved her kids inside those holdalls, those duffel bags. And then they said something, and this quote just made me like almost sick to my stomach. It chilled me because the prosecution said, quote, "There is nothing loving about the effort it took to contort Harry's body, bending his legs underneath him to put him into that bag." They then said that these murders were not a result of mental illness, but instead a result of Fiona's personality. With that, the jury was sent to deliberate, and after 8 hours of deliberation, they had come back with their decision. They had rejected Fiona's claim that she was not in her right mind at the time she killed her kids, and they found a 45-year-old Fiona Donnison, guilty of the murders of her 2 kids, with them basically saying that smothering her 2 kids in their beds was a gross breach of trust. And the trial judge described her murders as, quote, "deliberate and wicked acts," and he added in part, quote, "The premature end of such young lives would have been a tragedy, but this was no accident. You killed them. You were their mother. What you did defies logical explanation. It seems it can only have something to do with your feelings for Paul Donnison, the children's father and your former partner. These feelings of yours, combined with the narcissistic traits in your personality, which the doctors described, may have led to these fatal consequences." With that, Fiona Donnison was given 2 life sentences for the murders of her children, and she has to serve 32 years before she's eligible for parole. Paul said that Fiona's sentence did bring some sort of closure and justice to his beautiful children. He said that that day was a day to remember Harry and Elise, Harry who would have turned 5 just days after this. He said that though his innocent babies were taken in a horrible way, they live on in his heart and their spirits remain undimmed in all of those who knew them. Now, you would think that we were done here based on, everything I said, but there's a little bit more. There's 2 more things. One, Fiona did appeal, which I want to touch on briefly, but what I really want to talk about is the fact that after Fiona was convicted, it came out that police believed it was very likely that Fiona had committed at least 1 more murder. But first, the appeal. So Fiona and her attorneys tried to appeal the conviction, saying that the 32 years she needed to serve before being eligible for parole was too much, saying it was, quote, "manifestly excessive." Okay. They said that the murders happened during a sincere suicide attempt, and this was because Fiona was suffering from a mental health disorder that wasn't addressed, and so there was no premeditation, basically. But they didn't buy it, and Fiona sat there with her head bowed above, beyond. What? Before. Oh my gosh, the appeals court judges, there were like 3 of them in the city of London, as they rejected her appeal. One of the appeals judges, because remember there's like a panel of them, said that the trial judge had handled the case appropriately and that the decision the jury had come to was justified. He said that, or he or she, they said that they had looked over the case file and had sort of weighed the considerations, from both sides and had come to the same conclusion as the trial judge. And said that, quote, "For a mother to kill her own children is clearly contrary to everything encompassed in that wonderful descriptive phrase, quote, mother's love." So she's still in prison where, many people think she belongs to be, okay? Because what she did to her own children is horrific enough, right? What she did to Elise and Harry is horrific enough. But there are still several people, police included, who think that she's done this before, because you may remember that in the beginning of this video, I told you about her first daughter, Mia, who had died of SIDS or cot death, whichever you call it. It's the same sort of thing. Well, after she was convicted for Elise and Harry's murders, we found out that after Elise and Harry first died, police started looking into her and started looking into the details around Mia's death again. And that's because what are the odds that she kills 2 of her kids and that 6 years prior, another one of her babies would just mysteriously die? And basically the police thought that they had enough to try her, and like the prosecution to try her for Mia's death as well. They looked into this death and they found that when Fiona had called 999, she seemed to be able to control her hysteria. Like she could turn on and off how upset she was. So they thought that she was faking it. They also found it to be very interesting that on the night that Mia died, Paul happened to be with his ex-wife celebrating for her birthday. And they believed that Fiona, in retaliation and anger because she believed that Paul was probably doing things with his wife, killed their daughter to punish him. So even though Mia's death had been ruled as being a result of SIDS, they believed, like the prosecution believed, that in the light of Elise and Harry's murders, there was sufficient evidence to charge Fiona with Mia's murder as well. They said that basically when they looked at the case, which would have been her in relation to Mia's death, there was no one piece of evidence that would put her away. But if you looked at it in totality, along with what she did to Harry and Elise and saw what she was capable of, they believed they had enough to prosecute. Now, Fiona's defense attorney was like, this is crazy. Like, obviously, that's not the case. Obviously, you can't tell, even in person, let alone on a phone call, whether or not a person's distress is real or fake. And you also don't know how a person is going to react when they go through something so horrific. They also said that if you look at that time, there's not a single person, including Paul, who said that Fiona was a danger to Mia at all or had any sort of like tendencies to be vindictive in that way. So they were basically saying the prosecution had no case. Ultimately, the judge decided to dismiss the charge of murder against Mia from Fiona, basically saying that there was no direct evidence to even prove that Mia was murdered. But as I'm sure you can imagine, people were very skeptical about this ruling because they found Mia's death to be very suspicious. Because, bro, like, it is suspicious. It really is. And it has me wondering, like, do you think she killed Mia? Like, she definitely could have. We know that she has that capability in her. But then at the same time, after killing Harry and Elise, she quickly wanted to take her own life and things went so sour for her and she turned herself in. So I don't know if she could have done that and then lived with it after the fact. But it's something that really makes me question, like, do you think she did? Because I really don't know. What I do know is if she did do it, that's horrific. What she did to Harry and Elise is unfathomable. Like, those poor little babies, dude, they were so young. They barely got a chance to live at all. They just like playing in toys and stuffed animals and Teletubbies, and they were so loved, and now they're gone forever. And to think that's all because of their mother. And then it's not even just them, it's the people that are left behind that are just shattered because like Paul, his family, Fiona's two sons, they're just completely broken by what Fiona did. And last I heard, they were still in therapy, or they were in therapy. I don't know if they still are. This was quite some time ago, but they were receiving counseling to try to deal with this ultimate heartbreak. Because, dude, it's a pain that time cannot erase. It's a haunting reminder that sometimes darkness lies within the people we think we know and trust the most. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murder of Elise and Harry. I hope that you found it to be informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Elise and Harry with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I would like to revisit the question of the day. I actually have two now, and these are them. 1, do you believe that Fiona was suffering from a mental illness that made her not legally responsible for her children's murders? And the second question is this. Do you think that Fiona actually did this to punish Paul? Like, do you think that that's it, or do you think there was a deeper meaning here? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. I am curious to hear what you have to say. Before you leave, guys, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Just you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you, join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership, which I recently changed and made it really, really inexpensive, and also a link to my merch store if you're into that sort of thing. No. Also, if you don't already know, now you know that what you are seeing with your eyes and what you're hearing with your ears is a podcast. It's True Crime with Bratterstein. Okay? And if you search that on any podcast platform, you will find me, and I would appreciate it if you could give it a listen, a like, a download, whatever one does to interact with the podcast so I can get myself into the algorithm. It really does support me and my livelihood making videos, I'll be honest with you. But if you don't want to do that, that's okay. I just want to thank you for being here. And now with all that said, I just want to, again, thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. I hope to see you in my next video. And in the meantime, take care of yourself.